Recognize Mr. Goldman for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand that Mr. Palmer was asking some questions about some of my assertions about the removal of the Ukrainian Prosecutor General. First, let's be clear, I did not say that Vice President Biden fired Mr. Shokin. It was official U.S. and European policy to encourage Ukraine to fire him, which they did. But he is right about one thing. What I say is not evidence, and neither is what any of our Republican colleagues say on the other side of the aisle. They may not like what these witnesses say, but the testimony of the witnesses is the evidence, not baseless statements without firsthand knowledge. But I urge Mr. Palmer, if he wants to understand what actually happened, to read the 300-page report that we published on the first impeachment investigation. There's a lot in there about Mr. Shokin. Luckily, though, he doesn't even have to do that. You can just read the New York Post story itself, because in that story, Shokin admitted that he never opened an investigation into Burisma. He claims to have had, quote, specific plans to do so. Yeah, sure. For 2 years, Rudy Giuliani had been peddling Victor Shokin's bogus story, including with agents of Russian intelligence. And Chairman Comer, if you question that, I urge you to look up Andrei Derkach. So who was the sole source of the hard drive to the New York Post? Rudy Giuliani. And for these reasons, many journalists were highly skeptical. One reporter at the New York Post itself refused to put his name on the story. Fox News' Brett Baer said, quote, "The whole thing is sketchy," unquote. And both Giuliani and the Post refused to give the laptop to other journalists to verify and analyze it. In fact, Giuliani told the New York Times that he hoped that it would be published before it could be verified. So what is the so-called authentication for this laptop? Well, Chairman Comer said in his opening statement that it's a subpoena to the computer repair shop owner, which happened over about a year before the New York Post story. But that is not the same hard drive that Rudy Giuliani received months later from that repair shop owner and passed along to the New York Post after he was in possession of it for several months. Now, Mr. Baker, based on your understanding of Russian malign influence campaigns, does Russian intelligence have the capacity to manipulate a hard drive?
Yes.
So it is possible that some of the materials on a hard drive could be authentic, and some could be altered, manipulated, or even added to the hard drive. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Mr. Roth, you have testified today that Twitter was keenly aware of the hacking efforts by Russia in connection with the 2016 election. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And those efforts, I believe you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, by Russian intelligence to interfere in our electoral process continued up and through and including the 2020 election. Is that right?
Russian efforts certainly continued through the 2020 election and even through the midterms. I couldn't say specifically if it was military intelligence, as was the case in 2016, but certainly the Russian government was involved.
So let's run down what Twitter knew about this hard drive and this story when it was published. First, the sole source of the hard drive was Rudy Giuliani, who had been working closely with Russian intelligence agents throughout 2020. Second, Russian intelligence interfered in the 2016 election and was actively trying to do it again. And third, numerous journalists, including at the New York Post and Fox News, raised suspicions about the hard drive, and they refused to allow an independent analysis and verification of it. Now, Mr. Baker, based on your experience in law enforcement, wouldn't this give anyone concerned about Russian interference in our elections serious pause?
Well, I think as reflected in the public record, at the time, I thought there were great concerns on that side of the equation, because in part with respect to all the things that had happened since 2016 with respect to the hack and leak or hack and dump issues, There were facts that indicated that the computer might have been abandoned and so on, but which made it a very difficult case, which is why we're sitting here today talking about it.
Right, and there was a 24-hour delay in continuing to spread the publication of it, isn't that right?
Yes.
Okay. You know, that is exactly what 51 former intelligence officials, many from Republican administrations, even the Trump administration, said in that letter that is being distorted by Mr. Jordan and others at this hearing. Let me quote one paragraph of what they say. We want to emphasize that we do not know if the emails provided to the New York Post by President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, are genuine or not, and that we do not have evidence of Russian involvement. Just that our experience makes us deeply suspicious that the Russian government played a significant role in this case. And unless Twitter, like Special Counsel Mueller concluded about the Trump campaign in 2016, wanted to welcome Russian interference in an election, all of you sitting here today were entirely correct to be highly concerned about the legitimacy of this story. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Higgins for 5.
Thank you, Mr.